Amen. Okay. The only thing I'm going to talk about that was mentioned last week that you guys didn't spend a lot of time on it, which was fine. But I just wanted to point out a little thing, simply because we have people that watch online. You guys remember in verse 11 and 12 last week that you read, it said, and he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come in the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of stature of the fullness of Christ. You guys covered all of that last week. Well, the only thing that I wanted to add to that was just going out of my way to mention, whenever I get to this particular passage, I always try to help people who struggle with the concept of pastor to understand that in this passage, when it talks about giving different people roles to edify the congregation, of course we know there are no apostles, living apostles today, no living prophets today, but they existed in the first century to also build up and strengthen the church. But there are evangelists and there are pastors, there are teachers today. But I just wanted us to see that, when you say, Chuck, what are you? You say, well, I'm a Christian. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm an evangelist. Well, what's that? Well, you could say, I'm a preacher. Or I'm a minister. I'm a servant. I'm a teacher, a proclaimer. They all mean the same thing. They refer to the same thing. Now, not all servants are evangelists. Not all teachers are evangelists, per se. When Paul told Timothy to do the work of an evangelist. And so these are not titles, okay? I'm not evangelist Chuck, preacher Chuck, minister Chuck. I'm just Chuck who is that. And many others that are like that. And that's where the confusion gets in. The danger comes when you just take one of those terms and make a special meaning out of it. And that's what's happened in the denominational realm. They've gotten a hold of this one time in the King James Version. It uses the word pastor, and here it is, Ephesians chapter 4. One time. And you've got in the religious realm, everybody gravitating to that special term, and who's ever in the pulpit is called what? Pastor. Pastor Smith, Pastor Brown, Pastor Chuck, Pastor whatever. Why did they do that? Where did it come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from a failure to understand what the word means. The Lord gave evangelists and pastors, and it was plural, by the way, because there was two or more. But it's another word for shepherd. What is a shepherd?
An overseer.
An overseer. What's a bishop? A shepherd. What's a presbyter? An elder. Fred?
I think kind of when I had read that, the reason I knew that they were different was because you wouldn't say, if you exchanged an evangelist and pastor, both for preacher, and some to be a preacher and some preacher.
Yeah, good point. So now look at that, folks. If you're in that passage, and Trey makes a good point, you need to keep in mind when you're talking with people and try to make it abundantly clear. He said in verse 11, he gave some to be evangelists, which another term is a preacher. So let's just say he gave some to be preachers. Let's just say that, okay? And then he turned around and said, and he gave some to be pastors. Okay. Well, if they're calling everybody who preaches a pastor, then he gave some to be preachers and some to be preachers. Well, that doesn't make any sense. They're not the same. Now, do pastors preach?
Yes.
They better be able. Why would we say that?
It's one of them.
What is it?
To be able to teach.
Yeah, to be apt to teach. So we know they're teachers, and preachers proclaim. Okay, another word for it to be a proclaimer. So we know they do that. But here's what's happened: is they turn words into titles, and say who's ever up front, he must be the pastor. Well, no, because you have to meet the qualifications of an elder in order to become one. And that's what he's talking about here. And so these different words just help us to understand. And in different passages, when Paul was traveling and he wanted to call down the elders. He called down the elders from Ephesus. He wanted to talk to them because he had some very important things to admonish them about as far as shepherding and overseeing and protecting the flock. Well, why didn't he call for the preacher? Isn't it the preacher's job? Why didn't he call for the evangelist? They're one and the same. No, he called for the elders. Because the elders have a job that's not necessarily the job of the evangelist. Now, that doesn't mean preachers and teachers don't care for the congregation, but as far as having that responsibility of overseeing the flock and protecting them, making sure they're fed, is a responsibility of the pastors. And so I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. You guys already had a good discussion on all of that. Dave?
I got a question about prophets. Well, when Christ came, all prophecy had been fulfilled except for his second coming. So why would prophets be necessary?
A prophet doesn't only tell the future. Prophets teach. Isaiah was a prophet. He came and told the people, here's what the Lord wants you to learn. Sometimes in the prophets, sometimes he prophesied and talked about the coming of Jesus that would to come. So you need to remember that the prophet's responsibility was to proclaim the inspired word of God. And so prophets needed to exist in the first century, okay, in order to strengthen, to edify the church. It wasn't just to tell them about future events. And that's a misnomer that a lot of people have about prophets. A prophet is somebody who is called of God, okay, and they would prophesy. Not only would they prophesy about future, but they would just prophesy about the message that God gave them to give to man. And so what you're noticing here in this text is that he gave these apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, to build up the congregation. Now, do we have prophets and apostles building up this congregation? Do we?
No.
Yes, we do. We do. Don't forget that. We do. We just don't have any living apostles or prophets. Okay? That's the key. I remember, and the reason why that stands up in my mind is when I remember talking to a good friend of mine, I said, man, I hated to leave those young Christians in China. I hated to leave them alone. I said, they're not alone. They have the apostles. They have the prophets. They have the written word. And so we need to understand that their word is just as powerful for us today, which is why we study. They were inspired. We have the inspired word of God. There are just no living apostles. There are no living prophets today. And of course, this all brings us into this next section that we talked about, this unity that you guys touched on just briefly before you ran out of time. So let's read 13 through 16, 2 verses apiece. Warren and Tina, let's take those, 13 and 14, and then 15 and 16.
So we all come to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to be a perfect man, the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting.
Let's continue in love, may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love.
All right, Gene even brought this up in his sermon last Sunday night, talking about how important it is to maintain unity within the local church. And we stress that a lot, because if we don't have unity here, what are we going to have? Okay, division, chaos. What will that prevent? Work, edifying. You're not going to be built up. As far as having a good influence within the community, trying to help the lost. I'm going to tell you, the devil wants us to focus on so much problems internally that we don't focus on the outside and reaching out. You'll find that a lot. Evangelism is kind of swept under the rug is because people get bogged down on all kinds of church problems. Our church is going to have problems. Sure. That shouldn't be a problem. The problem comes if you don't deal with the problems. And what we have been told here is, okay, we want to be edified. We want to have unity here. And he mentions here the keys to it. All right. And of course, the obvious thing that he mentions here in verse 3, till we all come in the unity of the faith, till we all come. He's talking about the prophets and the apostles and the pastors and the teachers, the evangelists. If we don't take advantage of what they're offering, are you going to grow? Are you going to? I mean, if you're not going to take their teachings, you're not going to feed on their teachings, are you going to grow? You're not going to grow. And whose responsibility is it to grow? Just the preachers? Every one of us here, this congregation, the strength is not what's just being preached. Okay? The strength is what you guys have on an individual basis, what we all have on an individual basis. But if we're not growing, then this church is not going to be strong. Okay? We need to understand that. We need to be strong by being built up, allowing ourselves to be built up. And so that's going to require us to listen to what they have to say, to study. That's what he was talking about here. For what? To a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. You guys remember, guys, I know you have it memorized. 2 Timothy 3:16, we quote that. What's verse 17 say? You may remember what verse 17 says? Because 16 says all scripture is given by inspiration of God. Right? Talk about how that it's profitable for instruction, for correction, and in righteousness. And I left out part of that. But what's verse 14 say, or 17 say?
So the man of God may be perfect in all good works.
Thoroughly furnished unto all good works. That we can be complete, or some versions have the word perfect. Can you be perfect? You see, this is where you have to understand definitions of words. Perfect means, in this sense, to be complete. Are you complete? Better be. And you can be. And you can achieve that. Again, by feeding on the word, studying, rightly dividing it, we can be complete. The only way you can know whether you are right on the right path is by listening to what the Word of God has to say. And so you're seeing what is essential here. We must be willing to be edified, being built up, being strengthened. Have you guys ever heard the expression, well, you only get out what you put into it? How would that work during a worship service? You know, sometimes people go, man, I got a lot of that in it. Man, that was boring. How does that apply when we come to church service? How would that apply? You only get out what you put into it. Bernice? Listen. Attitude. Even before you get here, right? What else you might think? What's that? Perspective. All right. Attention. Yeah. Can you actually be participating by just listening?
Yes.
How do you participate by just listening?
Opening your Bible, following along.
Opening your mind.
Opening your mind. Okay.
Taking it in.
Taking it in.
Taking notes.
Making notes. Willing to be challenged. Willing to change. You know, if I come here and I only want to hear what I already believe, what I'm already doing, I don't want anybody stepping on my toes. You know, if my attitude is like that, I'm going to set the tone even before I come here. And so I really think that my goal should have been, and my goal is to come to worship God. Absolutely. But this isn't just talking about a Sunday service, right? It's not just Sunday service. He gave these things for the church to be edified, to be built up. And we utilize these tools even when we leave here. And so some people often say in their prayers, you know, let's take this lesson, apply it, and think about it and challenge ourselves. And so that's what we want. Now, avoid deception. Verse 14 says, here's one of the ways you avoid deception. What is that? Basically. Yes. But specifically, what is he talking about in verse 14? As children.
Don't stay on the milk.
Parents, have you ever told your child to grow up? What prompted that? What prompted you saying grow up?
They're acting like a child.
Okay, yeah, I know that, but why? Yeah, not acting responsible, not doing what was expected out of them. When you say grow up, we're saying, you know what, you have the ability to do what was expected out of you. And the problem is when we don't want anybody to grow up, we don't expect people to grow up. You know, if you always baby a child and you always make allowances for them and they never grow up and you don't rebuke them for that, you're not helping them. He talks about here, don't be children tossed to and fro. And you guys know how easily children can be deceived. And why is that? You can tell your children, I've seen programs on TV. The parents sit down, oh, we've warned them to be street smart, don't talk to strangers. And I've seen them do this show where they've got these parents, and the parents says, yes, we have educated our children, we have told them you don't do it. Here comes an ice cream truck. And they say, hey, you want to look on the inside? And the parents are just like in tears going, I can't believe my child went in there. I can't believe it. Children can be deceived. Nancy.
Because they're just easily influenced by what they want to hear or what they want to see.
You know, they entice the child with things, like you said, that they want to hear. That's what he's saying here. You know, we can train ourselves that I don't want to hear things I don't want to hear. Gene, and then back to Tina.
Well, the problem is that they don't start communicating at 1 year old. They wait till they're 6 or 7. And then the child, if they don't speak with authority, then the child hears it, it just goes in one ear and out the other.
That can happen. That can happen. And so it needs to be done early on, okay? But even,
milk,
yeah.
Milk, when you become a Christian,
and I've often said that. I mean, for new converts, I'll say, you need to get from the milk to the meat as quick as you can. Now, plus some people grow faster than others. You just got to understand, you need to do that. What are you going to say, Tina?
Well, a lot of times the children aren't taught, the evils of the world. They're only taught, the good things. So they don't understand the consequences of going inside the ice cream truck, or it's sugar coated.
Right.
Don't do this, but then there's no reason why or consequences of what could happen.
So what should teachers be doing?
Teach all.
And parents with their kids. Yes. It's called negative, isn't it? Negative sermons. Does it really matter what that person teaches or what that influence is out there? I mean, I just want to be built up. Listen, if you just want sugar, you just give kids sugar, what happens eventually? Well, that's true. But
They won't eat, they won't grow. Things that are good for them.
they won't eat what's good for them. And do you ever notice that when you have a sugar high, what happens? You crash. Okay, you crash. You see, guys, you guys know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It doesn't prepare you. If you're just going to be strong, to stay healthy is the goal. And so that sugar concept and the danger that is there, it's just a facade. And so just giving milk all the time might please the listener, but it's not helping them grow.
I thought it was interesting that he started off with apostles and pastors and teachers, and all of these have a very strong element of teaching knowledge.
Right.
And then when he talks about unity, it is equated with knowledge with that little word "and." You can't have unity without knowledge.
And did you find it? I thought you were actually going to say this also. I thought you were going to say that it's rather interesting that all the people that he mentioned were not babes. They were mature people, okay? People who are capable. And so if you bring somebody who only knows milk, preachers who don't study, and they only give milk, what happens to the congregation? You have a whole lot of immature, weak Christians. I've witnessed it. I've seen it. And the first sign of a problem, boom, dispersed. Couldn't handle it. we can't prevent problems from arising here. But as we grow and get strong, when a problem comes up, it won't destroy us. You know, when you parents get a call from your child far away, you know, and some problem happens, they're not, well, it's not the end of the world. Okay, you can handle this. You know, you got to deal with it. Here's what you need to do. And so avoid being deceived is the key, as you guys talked about, studying, because he mentions here by the trickery of men and cunning craftiness. And so here's the key to avoid deception. It's right there. What is it? It's very important, and I know you know it, because he says here, and you and I have to do this, don't be carried about with every wind of doctrine by trickery of men and cunning craftiness of deception, deceitful plotting. What do you got to guard against, Trey?
Well, we have to remember that everything that he's talking about there's one thing behind all of it, and that is Satan.
True.
And so even when you go all the way back to the garden, when Eve was tricked by that cunning craftiness of that serpent, that was the devil. I mean, in right there, and because there were no other men to trick her.
Right.
So we have to understand that all of this are just ways for the devil for Satan to be right back in there and trick us.
And that's true. And that is the root of it. What were you going to say, Miss?
So the only way you can avoid being deceived or tricked is to really have some knowledge, is to know whether that is a lie or the truth.
That's true. I want to couple that with what he mentioned in this verse, and it's a problem we have today. When you put such confidence in man, I just love my preacher. Man, he's the greatest guy. Man, he's so smart. Man, I just love him to death. He's a great guy. Blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying it's wrong to like somebody. But you need to be careful. You need to be careful of elevating people, because what's the danger with this? Obviously, it's wrong. Danger. But the problem is when you start elevating man is that you start relaxing. You don't need to follow along. You don't have to pay attention. You're not listening critically. It's not a bad thing. You know, preachers might get defensive or upset, but when somebody comes up and says, listen, did you say, wow, you're paying attention. That's good. You know, the problem comes is when we want to let down our guard, and we're just a man follower. Our preacher said this, and that's good enough for me. Whatever he says goes. And Tuck, what do you think about this? Well, I'll give you an answer, but you need to go home and think about this, because it's not like whatever I say, that's the law. Gene.
Go along with that. What I've seen is, let's say a person is maybe getting relaxed on coming to services, and and that, and you talk to them, then it's a hypocrite, sir. In other words, they're looking at people that they can see that they're not doing the right thing, and they use that as an excuse.
Right.
If their faith is not strong enough to get over that, or we shouldn't go around looking at everybody and counting this and that,
I like that, Dean. It's a powerful point, because some people just use I'm letting my brothers and sisters be my standard. There is a danger in congregations that if you're very weak and you're worldly and you move and you go to a congregation, what members are you going to focus on? What ones will you gravitate to? You're going to gravitate to the weaker, more worldly ones. Those are the ones you want to hang around with. Why? Because they make me feel comfortable in sin. We have a lot in common. They like to watch and do stuff that's ungodly, and I'm just going to gravitate to them. It happens. I'm just saying it happens. See, I want us to see, don't become a follower of man. You could be following your own brothers and sisters here, and that's dangerous if we have that problem. And I'm telling you, that cunning craftiness by which they lie in wait and deceive, by the trickery. that trickery of men. They play mind games with you, and they try to plant seeds and belittle other people and say, bad stuff. And again, what does this destroy? It destroys unity. Nancy?
Well, when you've done that, when you've gone to Paul, man, you've taken God out of it.
Well, that's the whole point, right? You taking God out of the picture, like the ultimate source, of course, is Satan. He doesn't want us to follow the Lord. Bernice.
I just read something last night, I don't remember what it was, but it was talking about the people in the church that cause division.
In Corinthians, he talked about that. There are people who can be within the congregation. The elders at Ephesus were warned about those who were going to come in and devour savage wolves. And so, guys, what I'm saying here is, not only are we worried about false teachers coming in and influencing us, you need to be a positive influence on your brothers and sisters here, okay? Because we all need to grow, okay? And rather than just say, I'm going to avoid them, I'm not saying, you can gravitate to try to help them. As a preacher always told me, who I love dearly, he just said, Chuck, you go to a congregation, set up some studies with people who need to grow. Help them. Just don't sit there and go, I'll see you Sunday and Wednesdays, you're on your own. No, you want to help them. And it's good to gravitate to certain brothers to try to help them. I'm just so impressed with Christians I've talked to recently, even family members who just say, I notice there are families that nobody talks to them. We have them over for dinner. Well, good for you. Good for you. Having people over that other people not necessarily would, and it shouldn't be that way, of course, but we just want to do our part and not sit back and say, I'm going to expect other people to do it. We can do it. We're all commanded to be hospitable, correct? We're all commanded to be hospitable. Who's the easiest people to be hospitable to? Family and friend. Your closest friend. People you have things in common with. How about having somebody over you have nothing in common with? Who would do that? Who's going to have people in their home have nothing in common with, don't like vegetables? Who would have these people? It's ridiculous. Okay. My point is, remember, we are trying to do all that we can to promote unity. Okay? But I got news for you. If you can't stand being around your brethren, why in the world do you want to go to heaven? Oh, I can tolerate them on Sunday, and I can tolerate them on Wednesday, but I don't want anything to do with them during the week. I don't want them contacting me. I don't want them talking to me, and I want to go to their place. You know what? But I really want to go to heaven. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't want to go to heaven. Because in heaven is where all the righteous are, where they're truly united, and they love each other, and they love the Lord. Let's be aware of this. I'm talking, this stuff scares me. I raise my voice only when I get worried about things, because I want unity here wherever the Lord wants it. Okay, I'm just telling what the Lord says, but I do too. My favorite verse, Psalm 133, verse 1. Who gets it first? Either electronically or by paper. We did that Wednesday, our Friday night Bible study. I said, who's the fastest? But read Psalm 133, verse 1. My favorite verse.
Live together in unity.
Read it again, Kels.
How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity.
Oh, man. Isn't that true? How great it is when God's people dwell together in unity. That's it. When one hurts, they all hurt. When one rejoices, they all rejoice. It's all part of it. But we're going to have to avoid this. And so I'm keeping my guard up. I love my brothers and sisters. I don't want to be a man follower. That doesn't mean I don't have respect for teachers and preachers and evangelists and the pastors. It doesn't mean I don't have respect for them. But I'm going to keep my guard up. Because they're just men. And men can make mistakes. And when you start letting your guard down, and it can happen, you see it even with families with children, because the children kind of let their guard down, and then mom and dad become the standard. And if mom and dad's standard's a little loose, and the children just follow along and do the same thing. Dave?
In Hebrews, it says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. So, talking about keeping our guard up.
That's it. No, we don't. But there are things that cause us to waver, and we're not going to allow man to do that for us. We need to be aware that people are going to be crafty, trickery, use trickery. And I'll be honest with you, brother. We give our brothers and sisters the benefit of the doubt, but when people move, you don't know them too well. You know, I should treat them the way I treat y'all, right? But you don't want to go through life saying, well, the jury's still out on Jesse. I've known him for a few years, but the jury's still out on Jesse. Well, what are you talking about, Chuck? Oh, the jury's still out. No. He could say the jury's still out on me. He could say it about me. I haven't quite made up my mind. No. We give people the benefit of the doubt. But the point is, we keep our guard. That's all. Because husbands, wives can start teaching things wrong. We did that in our monthly class on Friday night in Acts 5, husband and wife, sinning. And so we want to help each other. And so when somebody says something, your closest brother and sister in the Lord, sometimes you hang around with one another. If one of them says something, you can turn around and say, no, now you know that's not right. Don't just sit there and say nothing. Say, now you know that's not right.
If what you're saying is not true, then we wouldn't have all these divisions.
It's true. Yeah, I'm not a prophet here, okay? But we see it. It's out there. And churches have split.
I've always said that the strength of a group coming together should be in the pews as individuals. In other words, and it's hard to say this without maybe saying it that doesn't make sense, but if our Christian life is today, Sunday morning and Wednesday night, and that's it, and not the other time that we're living, and we're going to have problems.
Yeah, there's no question.
We're going to have a lot of problems. And the thing that, maybe I could lose my mind and go off the deep end, but the idea that he can say, you know, Gene, there's something I'd like to talk to you about, and I say, I'm not talking to each other. I mean, or any other member.
Yeah, right.
That's sad.
It is.
And you say, well, how can you worship and live with somebody like that? Then all of a sudden, that's where they are.
Yeah. But you know, but if you notice, husbands and wives will say, you know, we need to have a talk. Okay, let's talk. Because they love each other. The closer we get with one another, although I'm the first person to say that when somebody called me up and said, Chuck, can I talk to you? There's like pit in my stomach.
30 years from now, Chuck, about 25, 30 years from now, see what tweeting shows as far as husband and wife talking.
Right, sure. Now, again, getting back to this whole idea that we with a body of Christ, is not just the pulpit, as Gene talks about, but yet if the guy's only preaching milk, that doesn't help the congregation. But I also know that there are congregations who have gotten together and said, you know what? We need that guy gone. Which goes to show you the maturity within the audience, which is good. But if you don't have any maturity in the audience, and you've got this guy who's running the show, and everybody lets him run the show, you got a problem, right? And so this is why we help each other. We help each other. We grow together as a congregation. Now look what he goes on and talks about here. He mentions, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ. And he said, from whom the whole body, joint and knit together by whatever joint supplies. That's why I was doing this. You know, we could have inverted them, but I wanted to talk more about this at the last point, having that true love. But you'll notice in that last verse, he also mentioned about each member doing its share. Unity. It's hard. You know, we can be on the same side. I've used this illustration before. You guys all know tug of war. You know, we're over here. That's great. You know, and we're standing against sin in the world, and we don't want to be worldly here as a congregation. And we're all pulling. We're supposed to pull this way. But you know what? If Janet's pulling this way, and Trey's pulling that way, and Brian's pulling this way, Not making you look like the good guy, but the point is, if we're not all pulling the same way, you don't win. Now, I realize we're not doing this, we're not going to be judged as a church, but again, the whole point here is maintaining unity. There's no unity. Oh, we're on the same side. You may be on the same side. We may be in the same building, maybe members of the same local congregation, but are we working together? And that's why he says every joint supplies, everybody does its part. And when I think about this, you know, and if you've got 10 people over here, 10 people over here, you know, it's going to be quite the tug of war going on here. But if a guy named Bill says, you know, I'm out of here, Warren, can you cover me on this one? Well, as soon as he walks away, Warren's like going, what? What? And then another one, Sally says, well, I got places to go. Warren, can you cover me too? What? You know, the point is, he can only do what he can do. Nobody can do anybody else's job. Now, Warren can be faithful, pull. People not doing their job, he can still be faithful. Regardless. We know that. Regardless whether there are members not doing what they should be doing. But our lesson today is, are we all doing what we can be doing? Every joint supplies, is aware of things. And that's what he's talking about right here. What's going to maintain it? According to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. You guys know what it's like to have a part of your body that doesn't work, that hurts, right? I don't care if it's a stubbed toe, you've got aches and pains, whatever it might be, it affects your whole body. Affects your whole body. Cancer, like a cancer. I don't want to be a cancer here. I don't want to be a sore spot. I don't want to be a burden. Have you heard the term, you got to spoon feed somebody? Anybody heard that term before? You got to spoon feed them. What's that mean? We use that term a lot. Man, I feel like I got to spoon feed this person. What does that mean to you? I know you've heard it. Jen?
They don't know how to work on their own. You have to constantly feed them and tell them what to do.
Right. That's right. I mean, you know, can't you feed yourself? You're 22 years old here. But the problem is that happens within the church, does it not? There are people that don't grow and they can't do things for themselves. And if they can't do things for themselves, what will be the result? What will be the result?
They'll eventually fall away because the person that's feeding them is going to either get tired of feeding them or die themselves. And so that person won't have that other person to lean on. So
Right.
Then they fall away.
It's true. You know, I don't do you any favors. Let's just say I was spoon feeding you. You know, let's think of a scenario, but let's just say you never grew, you never grew, you were never challenged, you didn't stand on your own, you're not growing, and I just constantly catered, constantly spoon-fed you. What happens when I move? There's nothing there. You didn't help them. You didn't help them, Chuck. You actually hurt them. Well, if I didn't spoon feed them, they may have fallen away. Same result. You know, what's the difference? At least the other time you gave them a chance. You know, you have to challenge people. You have to get them to stand on their own 2 feet. And you as parents have done that with your kids. You do it. I'm not doing it. Mom, tie my shoe. I've seen you do it. Do it. I might be able to do it faster than you, but do it. And that's what you do as parents, and that's what we need to be doing within the congregation. Gene?
That's the reason that has tough qualification of having a family, children, and
That's it.
and a wife, and you know, and really, if you look at our family, that's a lot similar to
It is.
group coming together.
It is. And that's why this last point, we got a couple minutes left. You know, if we don't have that love for one another, it's going to be very difficult. the parent with the child, and, mom and dad love me. They know what's best for me. It's hard within a congregation sometimes. Has anybody here mastered criticism? Just go ahead and put your hand up. If good one. Okay, you want to see everybody's hands go up? Giving it. We're masters at giving. Who has mastered accepting criticism?
Because when somebody tells me something, I take it and I try to take that negative and make it positive.
Okay. Well, you know what? Kudos to you, because I have not mastered it.
It makes me better in thinking before I speak or thinking before I do.
That's good, and that's why I'm constantly working at it. When somebody says, I've got a problem with you, I'll get a pit in my stomach. Okay, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. And the Hebrew writer talked about that when a parent rebukes his child. It's painful for the moment, right? What child says, yes, I get whipped today. I'm excited about this. They don't look forward to punishment. I'm going to get grounded. Hey, they're going to take my phone away from me. Hey, nobody. There's something wrong if we like criticism. Who likes criticism? Do you like it? That's my point. That's when I say, have you mastered it? I guess I'm saying you actually like it. I don't like it because that means I've done something wrong. If it's legit. But what helps with that is speaking the truth in love. Me speaking it to them in love, you speaking to me in love. How we say stuff is important. We talked about that in Friday night class. Tactfulness, it's all part of it. But we also mentioned, how do you sugarcoat, you guys remember from Friday night, how do you sugarcoat a rebuke? And the answer was, remember? What was the answer? You can't. You can't sugarcoat a rebuke. Now you can build up to it by complimenting, look, you've been doing a lot of good stuff lately, and I really appreciate that, and you've done this, but I have this against you, like Jesus did. He wasn't sugarcoating it, but he was trying to let him know that, I'm not saying everything is bad, but, I have this against you. You've left your first love. And so we need to understand the importance for us to grow, and let's not lose sight of being united here. Our time is gone. I appreciate your comments, guys. And we'll pick up and we'll start in that next section next week, which is that.
I am.